This terrifying story is about a merchant named Mao who ran a large tavern in the town. The wine here was very cheap, yet it had a delicious taste. However, after drinking it, there was a bitter aftertaste. This type of wine, once consumed, would make the drinker feel light-headed, as if floating on air, followed by a deep sleep. Many people asked Mao about his secret recipe for the wine, but he claimed it was a family secret passed down for generations, and even with money, he would never reveal it. In truth, there was no secret recipe at all. Mao simply mixed narcotic substances into the wine, causing anyone who drank it to fall into a dazed and trance-like state. One day, a young man with a long face and sharp eyes appeared at the tavern. He was a regular customer. He ordered a jug of wine and began drinking it eagerly. While cleaning, Mr. Mao suddenly heard a loud noise. Looking back, he saw that the young man had collapsed to the ground. Mr. Mao thought the customer had drunk too much and passed out, so he went over to check on him. Upon closer inspection, Mr. Mao was startled. The sight before him was so terrifying that it left him horrified. Lying on the ground was clearly a fox dressed in clothes. Mr. Mao had never expected that the wealthy young man, Yan, was actually a fox spirit in disguise. So Mr. Mao tied the fox tightly with a rope, planning to take it to the authorities the next day to claim a reward. After a while, the fox woke up and transformed back into the young man. He pleaded with Mr. Mao to spare him. At this point, Mr. Mao remembered that a beautiful woman in town had often been harassed by a fox spirit at night. After some questioning, it turned out that the fox spirit had been the one causing the trouble. Mr. Mao then asked the fox spirit how it was able to sneak into the woman's house without anyone noticing, and how it could make her obey its will. The fox spirit revealed that it had a magical item stored in its den, and if Mr. Mao spared its life, it would give him this item. Mr. Mao was thrilled at the thought of learning a magical technique which would allow him to do whatever he wanted without being discovered. Mr. Mao grabbed the edge of the fox's cloak, feeling as if his feet were no longer touching the ground. The wind howled in his ears, as if he were riding on a cloud flying through the sky. The fox led him to its lair. Soon they landed inside a stone cave. The fox spirit took out a set of clothes and said that if Mr. Mao wore them, no one would be able to see him. He could do whatever he wanted and go anywhere without being noticed. Mr. Mao eagerly took the cloak and returned home, eager to test its powers. As promised, when Mr. Mao put on the cloak, no one in the house could see him. He was delighted, feeling that he had discovered a precious treasure. When Mr. Mao returned home, it was time for dinner. He sneaked into the room where his wife was waiting for her meal. He took off the cloak and happily entered the room, not wanting his wife to know about this magical item. Mr. Mao thought about the magical treasure and felt a sense of excitement. In his mind, he began to plan how to use it for his own desires. That night, after his wife had fallen asleep, Mr. Mao quietly got up and put on the special cloak. He then quietly left the house and made his way to the beautiful woman's house on East Street. His heart was filled with excitement about the plans he was about to carry out. Mr. Mao knocked lightly on the door. The silence was broken only by the faint sound of the knock, as if preparing for something unexpected. The maid at the house heard the knock and came out to check. She looked around but saw no one. Taking advantage of the situation, Mr. Mao joyfully stepped into the yard and quietly approached the beautiful woman's room. Inside, he heard the sound of water splashing. Turned out that the woman was taking a bath at that moment. Mr. Mao gently pushed the door open and entered. His excitement grew as he realized that his long-held dream was about to come true. A seductive scene unfolded before his eyes. A pair of slender legs appeared. and the beautiful woman, whom many men in the town had desired, was naked in the bath. Mr. Mao immediately felt his blood rush, his mind becoming restless, especially when he noticed the woman's undergarments. Unable to control himself, Mr. Mao moved forward to carry out his immoral intentions. Just then, beams of bright golden light shot through the window, striking Mr. Mao's body like needles. At that moment, he noticed a charm hanging on the wall. Panicking and frightened, Mr. Mao hurriedly fled from the scene. The next day, still furious and unwilling to give up, Mr. Mao returned to East Street to see what was happening. He found a crowd gathered in front of the beautiful woman's house, full of curiosity. Inside, a great monk was performing a ritual to exorcise evil spirits. The charm on the wall had been drawn by the monk, who was now using his magic. Suddenly, Mr. Mao felt his entire body contract in pain, as if he were being tortured. He quickly ran away from the crowd. Realizing that Mr. Mao was the evil spirit, the people immediately chased after him. Mr. Mao panicked, ran home, and as soon as he entered the door, he called out for his wife. But not long after, he collapsed and transformed into a large fox, to the astonishment of his wife. The great monk seemed to know that this was the work of the fox spirit's dark magic, and seeing the wife's desperate plea, he refrained from killing the fox. The wife brought the fox back to the room and tended to it, hoping it would return to its human form. But just 3 days later, the fox breathed its last and transformed back into Mr. Mao. It is said in the town that some believed Mr. Mao was punished for making fake wine to sell to customers, while others believed he had fallen victim to the fox spirit's curse, becoming a replacement for death. This story is about a man named Gu from the western side of the city. His parents died young, and he had only one older brother who spent his days idly and was addicted to gambling. However, bad luck always followed him. Whenever he had money to gamble, he would always lose terribly. He won very little, but lost a lot. After losing everything once again and having no way to earn money, he started thinking of ways to recover his losses. After thinking it through, he came up with an idea. He stole a piece of meat from the butcher's shop in the market and took it to his brother's house. His brother had helped him many times, but now he had become disappointed and no longer wanted to lend him money. But this time, to borrow money, Gu lied, claiming that he had quit gambling and needed the money to marry a wife. So, once again, Gu managed to deceive his brother. After getting the money, Gu turned around and went straight to the casino. And, of course, he lost everything in a flash. On his way home, he began to worry because his brother had said he would come to visit and meet his new daughter-in-law. As he was walking back home, he passed a forest near the village and suddenly saw a paper figure of a girl on an old tombstone by the roadside. It was common in the village for people to make paper figures when someone passed away, but for some reason, they didn't burn them. So Gu decided to take the paper person home to trick his brother. After bringing it home, he placed the paper person on the bed and covered it with a blanket. When his brother came, all he had to do was let him take a quick look from the outside and say she was ill, and the trick would be successful. The next day, as planned, Gu's brother arrived at his house. When asked about the new wife, Gu lied, saying that his wife was sick and resting inside. However, his brother had been deceived by Gu many times, so he wanted to check for himself. He insisted on going inside to see how his wife was doing. While the two were arguing, the paper person stepped out from inside the house and turned into a real living person. The girl greeted Gu's brother, and Gu was stunned with shock, Not believing his eyes, Gu couldn't understand how the paper figure could turn into a real person. The more he stared, the less he believed it. The wife was polite, bringing food and cooking, and she knew how to behave. This made Gu's brother very pleased, and he even wondered how someone like Gu could be fortunate enough to marry such a woman. However, Gu didn't dare to look at her directly. He appeared anxious, thinking that the paper wife might be a ghost transformed. After dinner, the couple saw Gu's brother off. However, Gu was extremely nervous. Once they entered the bedroom, his paper wife suddenly transformed into a gentle and beautiful girl, slightly seductive, which made Gu feel flustered. Then, the wife invited Gu to rest on the bed. Gu stood frozen. The paper wife glared at him and shouted, "Didn't you want a wife?" This made Gu almost wet himself. He gritted his teeth, climbed onto the bed, and pretended to sleep with his eyes closed. However, he was terrified and felt cold all over. At midnight, when he thought the paper wife was asleep, he tried to calm his nerves. He glanced over to make sure she was really asleep. Quietly, he got off the bed and grabbed a wooden stick. He gathered all his strength and struck the head of the paper figure, creating a large hole in its head. But suddenly, the paper wife woke up and sternly asked him why, after helping him, he was now repaying her by harming her. She then lunged at him, tightening her grip around his neck. Gu felt a suffocating pressure and intense fear. She squeezed his neck so tightly that he lost consciousness. When Gu woke up, it was already morning, and he found himself holding the paper wife, who was now lying next to him in a cemetery. From that point on, Gu was so terrified that he became ill and gave up gambling for good. This terrifying story spread throughout the town for a long time. It was about a man named Liu. Despite being from a wealthy family, he never married and secretly had an affair with a girl named Kim from the town. Every midnight, according to the appointment she had made, Liu would sneak over to her place. The girl always found ways to ask Liu for money, and he, indulging her every whim, gave her everything she wanted. Thus, the two had been seeing each other for over 2 years. With her flirtatious nature, it didn't take long before Kim started seeing a younger man named Fen. She realized that being with a strong and handsome young man was much better than staying with an old man. She also learned of some secrets regarding Liu's hidden wealth, which made her concoct a deadly plan. One night, while being intimate with Liu, Kim poisoned his wine and made him drink it. Mr. Liu died from poisoning, and Kim, along with her lover, staged a scene, claiming that Liu had died from a stroke. After Liu passed away, Kim and Fen took over his wealth and soon married each other. Not long after, Kim gave birth to a healthy son, and Fen was overjoyed. Their family life seemed perfect. The child grew up healthy, and there were no unusual events. However, when the boy turned 17, something horrific happened. One day, while the family was preparing for dinner, the boy went into a room and picked up a knife, charging at his parents. Both of them were terrified. How could their usually well-behaved son suddenly go mad and try to kill them? Unexpectedly, the boy spoke, saying that he had to kill the adulterous couple, for the king of hell had returned him to the mortal world to seek revenge. When the boy spoke like this, both parents were shocked and horrified. Hearing the voice, which was not that of their son, the couple realized it was Liu's voice. He had been the one they killed many years ago. They were terrified beyond measure. However, the son's strength was not enough to harm Fen and his wife. In desperation, they invited a monk to chant sutras for the soul's peace. To be extra cautious, they also invited Taoist priests to perform rituals to catch the ghost. They locked their son in the storage room for over 10 days. The boy became so gaunt that he almost looked deformed, but he no longer caused trouble. A month later, when the son had regained his health, they released him and prepared a lavish meal to nourish him. After a while, the couple raised their glasses to toast, unaware that beside them, their son was smiling devilishly. No one could have expected that the son had poisoned the wine and food. The mother clutched her throat in pain. By the time they realized what had happened, it was too late. The couple vomited blood, writhing in agony. It turned out that the ghost of Liu had never left the boy's body. It had been patiently waiting for an opportunity to exact its revenge. After killing the couple with poison, the ghost of Liu, inhabiting the boy's body, smashed all the wealth in the house. Then he took all the money to the street and handed it out to passers-by. Finally, he set the entire house on fire. Afterward, the young man wandered aimlessly, and one day, the villagers no longer saw him around.